Good afternoon. I'm Dinah Furch-Guttroth, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology, and I'd like to welcome you to this directors meeting of the University Transportation Centers. I have a particular fondness for the University Transportation Centers and their programs for the heights they've aspired to when the public health crisis has lowered expectations. I'd like to thank Caesar Singh, Director of our UTC program, and Dawn Tucker-Thomas, Denise Dunn, Amy Stearns, and Robin Klein for keeping everything running. Most important, they will be distributing the funds that were just allocated to the program in our latest budget. It's a gift to be able to see in our daily doing something fine and admirable. It's especially a gift to see something fine and admirable during times of difficulty. It's a great and a good thing to have your mind and your organizations unclouded by pessimism and fear. A number of UTC events, general and celebratory, happen in the next days. My service at DOT has allowed me to integrate poetics with pipelines, stories with safety, thoughtfulness with transit into the many speeches I have delivered. Benjamin, Franklin, and Erasmus, Aristotle, and Adam Smith all came along for the ride, so to speak. So this is one of my last chances to bring our old friend William Shakespeare back into the text. How do I love thee? A narrator asks in one of Shakespeare's famous sonnets. There are so many ways in which university transportation centers have deeply impressed me. You have impressed me in your handling of the particular challenges this past year, but not only that, you have impressed me with fine and admirable ways of your daily dealings. Let's count the ways. First, and most important, dedication to teaching. The pandemic forced education online and research into socially distanced modes. Despite this, your university transportation centers succeeded in pivoting online to provide student instruction, conduct research, and even deploy new transportation technologies. You have overcome the year's challenges and expertly provided comprehensive interdisciplinary research, education, and workforce development under your program. Commitment to the next generation. Tomorrow evening, we will celebrate your annual awards banquet. We will raise a cyber glass, and we hope some real glasses, to the students whose careers you have nurtured, the leadership you have given to fostering a new generation of professionals, and to your own lifetime achievements in transportation development. As it goes with so many human affairs, we plant the trees for the next generation to enjoy. I praise your dedication to improving transportation now and for the long-term future. Then there is your humanitarian focus. Some grantees in the UTC program this past year were pursuing research to make lives easier for those with disabilities and senior citizens who are in any way mobility challenged. You are also researching ways to remove barriers that rob us of time and hinder safety. In other words, how to reduce congestion, how to increase the efficiency and reliability in highly automated systems, how to improve advanced driver assistance systems. You are studying changing trends which urgently need fresh eyes and good data assessment. How public transportation is changing post-pandemic, how different transit system changes will change job access. You have your head in the clouds, rightly so, as you look at the effects of traffic-related air pollution on human health, but your feet on the ground as you look to design longer-lasting and more cost-effective payments. You have a nimble ability to focus on emergent problems. The UTCs were able to continue to study problems and address needs that had persisted in transportation for years. At the same time, you were able to pivot gracefully to imagine and examine emergent problems from the pandemic. Some of the UTC's proposals wisely noted that the problems of the pandemic simply exacerbated trends long in the making. This includes trends such as the growing use of telework and the decline in public transit ridership. Global reach. In my visits to UTCs before the pandemic and in my virtual visits over the past year, I have met men and women, students and professors from all over the world, from all continents except Antarctica. Many of you came here to study and stayed. Others will return home to spread the transportation technologies you have learned here far and wide. Our program does not only have national significance, it also has global significance. So, with a nod to Shakespeare, I thank you for your many admirable ways of leading the university transportation centers. With 4 new UTCs and an additional 37 that were already operating based on previous year's competitions, there is an abundant strength in the program. I will miss working with the UTCs. This work has been one of the highlights of my tenure at the Department of Transportation. How much I admire the individual UTC directors for devoting your life's work to the transportation field that touches every American. How grateful I am for being able to interact with those leading and heading transportation careers, because they have participated in all your activities. And now, before my senior advisor, Steve Polzin, who many of you know, presents his views of transportation in the post-pandemic era, I would be happy to welcome your questions.
Hi, Diana. This is Dawn. I don't see any questions in the question box yet. I did send the message to the attendees to send to put their questions there if they have any.
Well, that's okay. Steve always has plenty to say, and there will probably be a lot of discussion after his presentation. I always tell him he should make his presentations shorter to allow more time for discussion, but there's always more discussion that we have to cut off because his presentation is so interesting. So with that, why don't we go over to Steve Polzin to look at one of the most important issues facing us, the future of transportation in the post-pandemic era, when we all have the vaccine, we've all gone back to work. And the question is, how many of us will be going back to work? Many of us might still be telecommuting, and many businesses might still be on Zoom for long distance meetings. And how is that going to affect transportation? Let's turn it over to Steve.
Diana, I think Caesar's going to interject here with some content.
Okay.
And Diana, before Caesar speaks, Chandra Bhatt, he's the current CUTC president. He wanted to say thank you for your leadership and stewardship through challenging times. And Lisa Kay, she also wants to thank you for your support to the UTC program.
Okay, all right, well, thanks very much. I'm going to be teaching transportation economics at George Washington University. So I hope to be presenting a lot of the research at the UTCs in my classes, and maybe calling on some of you to volunteer to be guest speakers. So I hope to go on interacting with you. Thank you. So with that, let's move to Caesar, who has done just a magnificent job over the past year of the UTC program, directing and making sure that even though most of us are working from home, all the grants got awarded on time. The last 4 were awarded in record time, and everybody got their correct allocation of funds, and that's going to continue into the next year. So Caesar, thanks very much. We'll turn it over to you. Then we'll hear from Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I assume everybody can hear me?
Again,
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Great. Thanks again to Diana and Steve for guiding the UTC program forward during these challenging times. And I just wanted to give the community, the group, with an update of ongoing activities and what we've accomplished in this last very challenging year. So as of March, when we embarked during this challenging pandemic era, it so turned out that we had to execute a brand new competition for the Tier 1 centers. And we did so right around the middle of March and completed the whole cycle by end of August. So in essence, it was a very ambitious and was one of the fastest competitions ever held within the UTC program. So I've got to thank everybody on the team, and of course Diana's and Steve's leadership and guidance, and also our counterparts at Volpe in Cambridge. So with that, we were able to continue the program's operations almost at a normal pace, and we did not experience any deficiencies, whether it was IT related or otherwise. So the group, the team, the grant managers were able to continue their communications and the whole management of individuals' portfolios without any hitch. So with that, I wanted to give you an update on the 2019 UTC report to Congress report, which is right now at the final stages of being reviewed and finalization. So we hope that would be completed shortly, and we are proceeding on to compile the new 2020 report to Congress. And as some of you would be aware of, we have reached out to all of you to submit your representative one-pager project descriptions to be included in the report, which I'm sure we have received many already back. And we will be in touch to kind of finalize those descriptions as well. On another front, which is the UTC webinar portal. This is an initiative we started off in 2020, right around June or July, and it has turned out to be a great success. And sorry about that. And we've had almost 88 webinars, if you will, published, and an average submission rate of about 20 to 25 submissions every month. So we are doing pretty good on that. As far as the distribution list is concerned, now our list is in excess of 400 recipients. So the distribution is far and vast, and we hope to increase this distribution list as we move forward. And on a final note, I just wanted to encourage you on one aspect of the ongoing monitoring process of these our centers, which is specifically related to the performance indicators. As you all know, aware of, we have established 5 or 6 of these indicators over the years, and it's been pretty standard and consistent, and maybe we feel that we should revisit to see the appropriateness of these indicators for room to update, expand, and so on and so forth. So this is something I would like to solicit your input on, and please feel free to contact me or any of the grant managers to share your thoughts, because these indicators are reflective of what our accomplishments are, specifically on the workforce and education side of things. So we welcome your input and thoughts. And with that, I'm going to turn the platform over to Steve Polzin, who, as many of you know, is not new to the UTC arena. He's been involved for many, many years in the past with the UTC centers, and he knows exactly how we operate. And he's got some very great thoughts to share with us, which we will entertain to go forward with. So with that, Steve, the platform is yours.
Okay, thank you, Caesar. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and share some thoughts with you. You'll notice I labeled this issues and observations. So I'm going to be a little bit reflective today and share some suggestions for the program going forward. As was the case with Diana, I too am a non-career staff member at USDOT, so my tenure ends on the 20th of January. And the good news on that is I can say whatever I want today with no consequences. So I'll share some thoughts with you as we move ahead through this. And let's see if the clicker works here. The one issue I want to touch on first is the funding situation. As Diana and Caesar both referenced, Congress did pass FY21 annual appropriations the other day. So we're now in a position to understand what the UTC program is going to look like for fiscal year 21. Obviously, without reauthorization, there is not going to be a new competition, and we'll continue to provide funding to the 35 FAST Act created UTC centers. And there is some significance to that comment in that through appropriations, additional national centers were created in FY 2018, and additional tier 1 centers were created in fiscal year 20. There is no additional funding for either new centers or supplemental funding for those non-FAST Act reference centers in this fiscal year. So the resources that were received were the same as in fiscal year 20 in terms of the UTC core program, and the distribution of those will be virtually identical. It was such an irregular year with funding in CARES Act that Congress capped the lop-off, which is the administrative takedown, to be the same, or the takedown for appropriations to be the same as the prior year. And will of course take the administrative takedown as well. So the distribution to the centers at the 3 different categories will be virtually identical to what it was last year. And I say virtually because there is a little bit of rounding and some review. Both legal counsel and budget will have to look things over. Caesar and Amy will be doing those calculations over the next few months and be in touch with folks. But to give you some ideas in terms of planning ahead, that's the current plan, and it's fairly cast in place. It's not something that can be administratively changed with any significant degree. What's on the screen in front of you is some information that I use just to get a sense of tracking of the program and the activity levels since the beginning of the FAST Act. And as you can see, there's a little note over here on the left. About 45% of the total resources that had been distributed through the full 5 years of the FAST Act had been invoiced to USDOT as of September 30th of last year. So as in, we're, literally at the end of the 5th year of the program, and less than half of the resources had been spent. And we understand that with the delays in competition and particularly some recompetitions, in this particular case, COVID and all kinds of extenuating circumstances, it's sometimes challenging to spend in proportion to which resources are received. I would caution folks to, I know there's a natural temptation to want to have a runway, have time for the uncertainty that relates to recompetitions and reauthorizations and continuing resolutions, et cetera. So from a strategic planning perspective, I know it's desirable to have some lag time in there. I would caution the magnitude of lag time. I would encourage folks to be a little bit careful and deliver the results. I mean, Congress is paying for results, and so those resources need to get consumed and produce knowledge and workforce, et cetera. So I would caution on that and would encourage the administrative USDOT folks to be very disciplined about extensions, et cetera. MAP 21 centers literally were just completed in some cases. It's a burden for them to continue to carry centers through multiple appropriation acts. So I'd encourage some real discipline in spending those resources, producing the deliverables. Obviously, you need to be strategic, but don't get so far behind that it looks to outsiders as if the research hasn't been carrying out or the program might be overfunded. So I offer that as a caution. Caesar referenced a number of things that we've tried to do over the past few years relating to increasing the engagement and strengthening the relationship between the USDOT and the UTCs. Diana was particularly active when pre-COVID to visit centers and get to know folks. More of us would have done the same thing had COVID not occurred. And we've involved UTCs in a number of different events over the past couple of years. The Accessibility Innovation Summit, the Consumer Electronics Show. We'd scheduled folks to participate in South by Southwest, which was canceled because of COVID. We were delighted with the response of folks to our call for participation in the artificial intelligence webinar that was held internally at USDOT. I believe we had 7 or 8 proposals there. We picked 3 speakers whose topical content filled some gaps in that program, and that was very well received. And as Caesar mentioned, the web dissemination of your webinars is particularly well received, and we're building a distribution list within USDOT and Volpe and other places. We've had some requests from outsiders, including some state DOTs, to link to our in effect, program guide for your activities. So we think that we can continue to build on that and make that a valuable resource for dissemination. Obviously, the summer and winter meetings had some crimped style because of COVID. And of course, Caesar referenced the annual report. In addition, Tim Klein on the DOT staff has presented a presentation to committees over on the Hill very recently with well-received presentations on some of the activities that have been carried out and the kind of the nature and the status of the program as it exists with, like I said, with some good interest of folks on the Hill. There are some administrative and strategic issues that face transportation research in general, at least again from my perspective, that I want to share with you. We're seeing in transportation an unprecedented rate of change. COVID obviously is a black swan type of rare event, but even preceding COVID, the pace of change of technology, demographics, governance strategies, et cetera, we're really at a pace that eclipsed anything that I know I'd seen in my several decades of experience in the field, and arguably over 50 years, and some would argue 100 years since we've seen such a dynamic time in transportation. That suggests and requires a response from the research community in terms of what do we need to do perhaps different to position ourselves to continue to make contributions in the context of the dynamics that we've witnessed and are likely to continue to see, particularly as we move forward with automation, adjust to some what are likely to be permanent changes post-COVID in behaviors and activity patterns and other aspects of transportation. One of the things that I know USDOT is interested in is keeping the research initiatives targeted on priority needs. And obviously with things changing fast, that means those needs change faster, and what's a priority this year may usurp what you presumed would be a priority 1 or 2 or 3 years ago when you did some longer range planning, and we need to be able to adapt to respond to what's critical needs of the industry. And I think and not just UTC programs, but research in general, this is a similar theme that TRB and others are recognizing, that we need to be in a position to adapt our priorities and our schedules that way. One of the responses to that was the strategy we used with the Tier 1 competition recently, where we chose some very specific research theme areas that we anticipated would be high priorities, as opposed to giving broad general themes. We did, as many of you know, get a very robust competition. We really appreciate the effort. We had very good proposals. It was a very competitive competition, and folks seemed to thrive on that structure and that strategy. The other thing that it does from a researcher and student perspective is, there's some folks that are interested in those outcomes, and because they have a stake in them, folks that were involved in helping steer the priorities and the identification of needs. So we think that that's an important strategy. Who knows what'll happen going forward with reauthorization in terms of how folks choose to structure the program going forward, but we think that that was very effective. One of the other elements that we implemented as a part of that is, in addition to the administrative point of contact for each UTC, there's a technical point of contact, which means there's going to be somebody at DOT that's reading the quarterly reports of the draft deliverables and the deliverables, and being in a position to both keep the UTCs plugged into what they're hearing and seeing at DOT that might be relevant and informative to the researchers at the universities, but perhaps even more important, you've got somebody that can be an advocate and a source to help disseminate and steer those findings and information that you generate to the right departments and programs and activities within DOT. This is new and it'll be formative, and folks are busy, so it's not trivial to make the time commitment to have these technical contacts, but we think this is an important strategy to help strengthen that relationship and that tie-in between the UTCs and the USDOT. The other thing, we'll be looking for and certainly encourage folks to share with the career staff at USDOT and future non-career staff ideas and strategies to make sure that there is an awareness of what's going on at the UTCs in the future, to make sure that your findings and information gets pushed forward to folks. I spent some time a couple weeks ago with the FHWA Research Advisory Committee, very, very interested in the UTC program, want to be engaged and active in it. That's certainly the same thing within the UTC staff within OST-R and the rest of OST-R. We recognize that there's a time and money commitment to doing that. We've been challenged internally with the administrative takedown level of 1.5%, impeding the ability to have the staffing levels that we'd like and the activity levels that we'd like. That had been complicated by the new competitions that had been reoccurring. Those are expensive and time-consuming activities for USDOT, as you can imagine. So it's been a challenge to try and do that, but we've made some good progress in doing that. We've got a very experienced staff on board in Caesar's team, so they can, there's nobody new being trained to do their job, so they can be very productive and efficient. But we want to continue to increase engagement in the various ways that we referenced previously here. Another thing that USDOT has been under a fair amount of pressure and attention from OMB and Congress and others to make sure that we're spending resources wisely and we're not duplicating research, and that we are coordinating research within the modal offices. But that started to get broadened to being a sensitivity to making sure that we're not, in effect, tripping over each other or duplicating work unintentionally. And towards that end, it'll be important for the USDOT staff to have a pretty refined understanding of the research activities that are being carried out by the UTC members. We're increasingly being asked to do that. You've seen some information calls for example, the artificial intelligence and other areas over the past year. But I suspect the staff will continue to work towards having a stronger awareness of the work that's being carried out by the UTCs in a much more real-time basis, so that we can make sure that we're not having a modal office or somebody else initiate a project that's already being carried out. And likewise, we can inform yourselves of stuff we're doing to make sure that there's not unintended duplication. And I qualify that with unintended. Obviously, to have multiple perspectives on problems is appropriate in many cases, but we don't want that to be duplicative to the point that those resources aren't productive. I think the COVID situation is an example of that, of some of the things that I've talked about. Obviously, things were emerging very, very rapidly. Numerous UTCs and other entities were jumping on this issue. They want to help. They want to help address this issue and the recovery from it, and understand the implications going forward. So it's important that people coordinate and cooperate and share what's going on, so that we're not being duplicative. Research resources are scarce, so we need to be very careful to make sure that we're using them productively. And I recognize that cooperation and coordination sometimes risks revealing things that you want to preserve credit and for, but you need to take some of those risks. It's important that we coordinate things and that we share what's going on. I think that the UTCs do a, whoops, we back up a little bit here if we could. Hang on here. That you do a very good job of communicating with stakeholders and peer researchers. A lot of the mechanisms of dissemination are really targeted to those audiences. I would encourage additional attention to external stakeholders, particularly downstream users of the information and the research findings that are going to be in a position to put that into application. Not every project I recognize is a project that has an immediate next step implementation step, but many of them are. And that's sometimes the challenge is breaking into that audience and making sure you've got content and delivery styles and means of reaching those audiences so that the findings can get deployed and that you've identified those target audiences and target your content to those audiences. They're not concerned about the sophistication of the methods necessarily, or how it was unique or what its contribution to the research state of knowledge was. They're interested in how it can help them solve problems. The other thing that we're increasingly seeing, again, not unique to UTCs, but a number of entities are producing, myriad of webinars and mechanisms to share content and information. The people are still very, very busy. It's very difficult to carve a slice of time. So you need to be very disciplined. You need to lead with quality work and market it appropriately and attract folks and build the confidence in them so that they know that if they spend 30 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes listening to a webinar material from your center, that they got something out of it and it was worth their time, and they're going to have confidence in that work and come back and talk to you or learn more about it and engage. So I would, again, an area where I'd encourage folks to pay some attention going forward. I'm going to share a couple of just personal perspectives on the future along the lines of the comments I'd made with respect to the rapidly changing world. One of the things we're seeing in transportation is the nature of the workforce is changing. Obviously, the demographic distribution is changing, as is the country, and we'd expect to see that, and we're certainly seeing that occurring. But even more than that, the multidisciplinary nature is changing. That's not been a secret. A number of centers have very multidisciplinary staffs. But we still are in kind of a mold where it's urban planning and civil engineering programs that have dominated the UTC program historically. That may well start to shift. We may see more computer science, human factors, economics, other discipline areas with transportation centers or being parts of teams or lead applicants in this program in the future. And associated with that, all of a sudden, this issue of defining educational engagement and impacts matrix becomes very, very different. A lot of our metrics, performance metrics, have looked at programs and courses and grad students, et cetera. But that's a lot more complicated to think about and define and measure when we're talking about computer scientists who are involved in automatic vehicles, and their pursuit of degree is not in essence a quote transportation degree, but transportation is their field of application, and the educational content that's disseminated to them might be real different than we've historically measured. So we need to find a way to think about that, understand what's going on in the workforce characteristics, and be able to track and monitor and have some sense of what that's going to mean to particularly some of our issues with educational engagement and our performance metrics. This faster pace of change, I also think, begs some rethinking of our processes for selection, execution, and dissemination. I think all across the board, those processes need to be considerably faster than they've historically been. It's not uncommon for multi-year project selections processes. And this, again, isn't just unique to the UTCs. This is TRB and other entities struggle with this same thing. And we need to be able to execute fast. Not every project needs rapid execution. Some simply by their very nature require multiple years to execute. But the schedule needs to be designed around addressing the problem and bringing the information to bear, not necessarily around the academic schedule of a PhD candidate. So we really need to, again, keep the information user in mind and design the processes to accommodate that. At the last annual meeting, we had a discussion of this issue of research publication and journal requirements that have given pause to some folks in producing working papers or project reports for fear that it would jeopardize the originality of a subsequent journal publication. That's really untenable in this era where we really need to get that information out in many topic areas. If somebody's doing some esoteric methodological thing, that might be fine to sit on something and wait for a 1 to 2 year cycle for publication, but it's not fine when we're trying to feed information into decision making in what's a very dynamic environment right now for transportation. With that, I'll turn to, okay. Here we go. We're getting a delay here on the slide. Sorry about that. Caesar referenced this issue of rethinking the performance metrics that we use. And we've really got, and I use the term we, I think of the kind of the academic research community in partnership with DOT when I use that term. But we've got reauthorization coming up in the next year. We'll have contract extensions and FY21 money appropriations. And so we've got a couple of opportunities here going forward to rethink the performance measures that get submitted to document what's being carried out, activities that are being carried out by the UTCs. And I'm not speaking of the financial reporting side, I'm speaking of the activity reporting side. I think in terms of kind of performance specs for that set of metrics, we want something that we can track and aggregate over time. And at one point I looked at the database, and this was a number of years ago. I wanted to see what we could say about the number of PhDs being produced. And it really wasn't particularly satisfying because there was enough change in centers and measurement and issues of confidence in the data that I was very reluctant to draw any conclusions from it. So we need to think of what measures that we can have confidence in, potentially include in things like reports to Congress, and share amongst ourselves and use it for our own thinking and strategies, and really understand what's going on. We need a mechanism to make sure that universities that are engaged in multiple UTCs aren't in essence double counting everything. It's not uncommon to have a student or faculty member be involved in projects that might be part of multiple UTCs, but we need to think through so we really understand and know what those numbers mean if we want to kind of aggregate those or treat those in any way that's meaningful in an aggregate sense. We've also been less than explicit about how people are attributing activities associated with their matched funds in terms of the reporting of that. And I'd encourage folks, and by folks I mean the UCT community in conjunction with the DOT staff, to really think this through over the next several months and think about what they might want to refine and do different in terms of a path forward. Perhaps refine and clarify some definitions. Perhaps rethink some of the educational engagement. I know that a lot of these programs, we count on these resources to sustain things, not just initiate new stuff. And sometimes with the metrics can bias things, like it's simpler to rebrand a course and claim it as a new course because then it counts in your count, etc. But it may not necessarily be a net new course, etc. It may just be a refinement. Similarly with programs and other activities, these UTC funds have become, significant components of activities at a number of the universities, and sustaining those in itself has value. We're not always in a grow mode in some of those things. Obviously, we want the level of effort and the burden for both yourselves and the DOT staff to be reasonable and practical. We want you spending your time accomplishing the activities in the program, not just measuring them. And so I would encourage, as Caesar mentioned, some initiative to collaborate, perhaps a task force, and some other mechanisms maybe, to put some thought into what kind of performance metrics make the most sense going forward. And with that, that wraps up my comments. But I'd be glad to talk about. I did actually here, I believe, skip one slide that I was clicking through. I just want to make a comment on the supply and demand for transportation research. And I'm sorry I skipped through that slide, but I think the research community needs to think about that a little bit. It's grown dramatically over the past 20 or 30 years, and we've done a great job of building a cadre of expertise. We have oftentimes developed, and a lot of the intellectual talent in the university programs is going into producing more researchers. And that's good, and we want researchers, but we also want people who can implement and be practitioners. And I would caution on that balance there. And I would also caution folks on the pursuit of ever more sophisticated methods that perhaps exceed the relevance and the sensitivity to the actual levers of influence that this information can have on policies and programs. So just as somebody who's reviewed lots and lots of research over the years, oftentimes there's so much attention to methods, and I realize there's a bias in the academic community in terms of publications, etc., and a lot less attention to the execution of that, the implementation of that, the implications of that in practice. So I would encourage folks to have that balance in their programs, make sure they're producing folks that not only know how to do very sophisticated analysis, but know how to implement that, apply it, know if it's the right tool for the right job, etc. So with that, I'll end my comments and be glad to take questions, as I'm sure would Caesar or other staff folks on the line.
Yes, Steve, this is Dawn. We do have several questions that have come in. I want to ask the first question, which you could either respond to, or Caesar or Diana. It's, will the new fiscal year 2021 funds also extend the life of our FAST Act awards 1 year through September 2023?
I would anticipate they would.
That would be correct. Yes.
Okay. The next question, please explain how the FAST Act reauthorization and the Invest in America Act approved affects UTC recompetition. I'm sorry, approval affects UTC recompetition.
The reauthorization of the FAST Act hasn't occurred yet. Is what we had is a 1-year extension of the FAST Act through fiscal year 21, which ends at the end of September, and will anticipate a very active engagement within the starting up real soon as the new administration is in place, because of infrastructure's importance to the economy and potentially, economic recovery, et cetera. So I would anticipate over the next 6 months that there's going to be very active engagement in terms of what that new reauthorization looks like. Included in that will be language relating to the UTC program. Obviously, it's at Congress's discretion as to what they choose to say about competitions and numbers and sizes and dollar amounts and all of the other attributes of the program. But one thing I would say is that the program has tremendous support in Congress. It punches above its weight, so to speak. While it's a $77.5 million program this year, it's actually been a little more than that a couple prior years when we had special appropriations. But nonetheless, it's got tremendous attention. We've got over 140 or 50 unique educational institutions that are part of the program, well over 200 total universities that are in a consortium and or lead capacity in one or more centers, and that probably undercounts the 4 new UTCs that were created this year. So they've got a big profile across the country. A number of folks obviously work with lobbyists and legislative leaders in their areas to help shape that. So that really, that's in your hands and Congress's hands to see what that reauthorization looks like. I know the various groups, CUTC and others, have had thoughts about what should be in that bill in prior versions, et cetera. And that'll be your challenge going forward to help shape that in a way that's constructive.
Okay, this next question, you kind of touched upon a lot of it already. I guess it's like a forecasting question, or one attendee asked, when do you envision the next competition happening? So you touched upon, future competitions. I guess
realistically, and Caesar, you may want to jump in on this too. If let's say we're fortunate and actually get reauthorization in the July-August timeframe for implementation at the beginning of the next fiscal year. Typically, the competition is what, Caesar, 15 months before the next set of awards are made after authorization? Is that a fair guesstimate of what's happened in the past? Or Amy may?
Yeah. Some of the underlying sub-activities that some of us don't see up front is once the authorization does take place, I mean the money flow. In order for the money flow to come over to our side of the fence, I mean, there's a significant timeline involved in that process before we can even embark on a competition. So yeah, 15 months would be a reasonable timeline to assume.
Okay. And several attendees have requested a copy of your presentation slides, Steve. So would you be able to share that with us and with Caesar, and he can get that out to the UTC community?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, be glad to.
And And then we also have a couple of additional comments. Rob Bertini, he wanted to thank Diana for her dedication to the UTC program. And Zach, he's with the Carmen UTC. He hopes that your paths cross again in the future and that you all would be able to work together. And I think that's about it that I have in the chat box for now.
Okay, well, we've pretty much filled the time slot as well, but don't hesitate if there's other questions, shoot them to Caesar and he'll share as appropriate, and to Diane or myself if there's something that we can offer some insight on. We'd be glad to do that.
Okay, is Diana still on, or did she leave for another meeting? So I guess this will officially close out our UTC directors meeting.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, everyone.